com, which if you haven't found it yet, please go and have a look. It's all jolly exciting. Thank you for staying so late in the afternoon. These are rather glamorously called the VIP interviews. And we've got two contrasting interviews over kind of 2 days. This afternoon is what you might describe as being at the bleeding edge, I guess, of what's happening in media. And tomorrow afternoon, we're going to the other extreme, where I'll be interviewing Tim Weller, who's the CEO of Incisive Media, which is more like the bleeding hell of media. Don't tell him I said that and everybody's tweeting. Please don't tweet it. He'll cancel and won't come. It's my pleasure this afternoon to introduce you to Carla Buzasi. See, I got it wrong, didn't I?
You did, but, you know, it's all right.
Close
we'll let
enough.
it pass.
Carla is deep at heart. She's a journalist and worked in consumer magazines for most of the early part of her career. Big chunk of time at Condé Nast, but now, more importantly, she is the UK editor of the Huffington Post. How many people in the room are users, readers of the Huffington Post? Wow.
That's
okay,
not bad.
That's not shabby, Carla.
For the afternoon.
Just for those who don't understand it, just explain what the model is for the Huffington Post, because it's not like a newspaper or a companion website. Just explain how you do what you do.
So the Huffington Post launched in the US in 2005, and it started with just 5 people. They've got about 600 journalists there now, but we are sort of adopting a similar model, so I've got quite a small editorial team. And
can we,
oh,
Mr.
they
Sam,
can't hear me. That's
can we have a bit more noise over here?
Shall I just shout? Shall I project better? See, I'm a better writer than I am speaker. So the way we work, there's sort of 4 aspects to editorial on Huffington Post. There is the original journalism, and I have a team of in-house editors and journalists. That's across news, politics, entertainment, you name it. We aggregate a lot of content. We're very honest about that, and we're very open about the way we do that. So we don't believe that any media organisation has the monopoly on brilliant journalism. And therefore we want our users to be able to access all of that content as well. So we will, if we see a fantastic story elsewhere, link right from that big front page image to another site, a competitor site, so that our users can access that. Blogs is probably the sort of USP of the site, and one of the things that we're most famous for. So we have thousands of people who contribute to the site on a huge range of topics in our blogs. And then the 4th part is comments. So user engagement for us is really, really important, and we make it as easy as possible for people to comment on stories, to interact with those stories, and it is just as important to us as the original journalism on the site. Let's
just talk about the curation bit for a moment, because that's kind of unusual. Well, we do a bit of that as well, and I understand how that works. But the Huffington Post has always said that it's the friend of traditional media, not its kind of enemy. And yet, if you're scraping links from other people's journalism, some people might say, well, you're stealing their audience. One of your VPs, Jimmy Mayman, said recently in the FT how proud he was that you'd overtaken in traffic in the US the New York Times, which doesn't sound very friendly. That sounds quite aggressive. How do you reconcile those two things? I mean, should those people who are media owners in the room see you as a friend, or actually treat you with a high degree of kind of caution and maybe think you're a bit toxic? Not you personally, Carla. You seem very nice.
Clearly, I wouldn't like to be labelled personally toxic. No, I mean, I think that anyone, and I'm sure there are people in this room who are working on websites, spends a significant amount of their time looking at the SEO of their headlines, of the content they're writing, because they know if they get indexed by Google or Bing, they're going to see significant traffic from that. And in that way, we don't scrape sites in that way. It's very carefully curated by the editors, but we are able to send sometimes significant amounts of traffic. And what's been really interesting for me since I've been in this position are the number of PRs from other publishing houses who come to us and say, how can we feed that information to you? How can we tell you about the latest person on the cover of our magazine or the exclusive we've got coming up? Because they know if we feature that and we link left, right and centre, that's going to send traffic and, you know, great SEO rankings as well.
But somewhere in there, I mean, I know you're running kind of the editorial piece of it, but there sounds like there's a kind of a commercial challenge there for those people who are working with you. Because if you become the destination site through which I find out about my celebrity news or my political news or whatever it might be, then somebody in your organisation is going to try and monetize that in some way by selling some advertising, I guess. That's kind of how it works.
But I can't sell advertising on an external site. My commercial directors can't sell advertising on, unless, you know, the Times
but on the link
would like
pages
us
you can, I guess.
But on internal pages, yes, obviously we can. But that's what we're doing. We're often, as I said, from the front page of the site, sending our traffic straight off externally. What we believe, obviously, is people will want to come back to us because they know that we're a great place to see the best of everything that's out there, and a way for them to get out and read those other stories. And then hopefully they will read our great journalism as well.
We understand the great journalism,
yep.
And I think we kind of all understand, and I guess the Huffington Post organisation would acknowledge that whatever the future of publishing online looks like,
yep.
The costs of content creation have got to be lower probably than they used to be, yep. in the old model, which seems fine. But you employ a surprisingly large number of journalists. You have, what, about 20 editors on the payroll?
Yeah, well, it's large or small depending on what you're comparing us to. I mean, it's small probably to the Guardian's X hundred amount of journalists. It's large perhaps to a blog site. But when we're covering, as I said, I mean, you can see from the navigation there, the number of different areas we're covering. I need to have experts in those areas. Well, I'm an editor. An editor always wants more journalists, don't they?
Yeah, that's been my experience. They always want. I mean, you clearly have a lot less journalists than the Guardian. I mean, yes. The Guardian famously is looking for as many platforms as it can upon which to lose money. Some people have said, but opening a hotel soon.
I know. I read that last week as well.
What's that all about?
Interesting.
Not something on the Huffington Post strategic to-do list.
Not that I know of. No.
Okay, well, that seems. But the third leg of your kind of content stool is the kind of the bloggers, and that too has been kind of controversial in some quarters, because some have said, look, actually this is kind of exploitation. You're monetizing other people's content for which you're not paying anything, and that just doesn't seem to fit in with the normal modus operandi of how good professional media should work.
Okay. So over to me on the blogging front. What we say right from the start on the blogging side is we are providing a platform for people to have their views held. We don't commission our blogs. We don't give people deadlines. We don't give people word counts. It's totally up to whoever or whomever would like to blog for us, and they can do it as frequently or as infrequently as they like. So the blogging side of it is a platform in the same way that Twitter is, or Facebook is, or, I don't know, the letters page of a newspaper is. And as I said, I mean, we've got over 2,500 people contributing on a fairly regular basis to the site now. And for me, even if I had nothing to do with this site, the fact that you might have, David Cameron next to Joe Blogs off the street, and both their opinions are given equal weighting, is really interesting. And I've been overwhelmed by the response we've had from people in the UK to having their views heard on the blogging platform. So it's been pretty overwhelmingly positive for us on the blog side.
Somebody's just tweeted, actually, hands up, who's user of Huffington Post, not me, they don't pay writers. So I guess if you're a professional writer, it feels uncomfortable. I entirely get if I'm let's call it an amateur blogger, or even if I'm David Cameron, I don't probably expect to get paid until I retire, and then no doubt I will expect to get paid lots of money. But if you are, if you become very successful, then I guess if you're a professional writer, this feels like a pretty dangerous kind of beast to have in the kitchen.
So yeah, obviously, I've heard this numerous times, but we do pay our writers and editors. If you're in-house and you apply for a job and you're successful, we do pay those. And I was interviewing someone earlier today for a position, and they pointed out themselves, we're one of the few publishing houses hiring at the moment. We're investing in journalists day in, day out, while newspapers, magazines, other websites are making redundancies. So I think it's very unfair to say that we don't pay writers. We do pay our writers. We don't pay our bloggers. But if you're a professional writer and you don't want to blog for us, that's fine as well.
There are some blogging sites. I mean, Demand Media I'm thinking of, which is in kind of a different place, which you might know of, where they do have a kind of a payment system which is related to the amount of traffic that you kind of generate and the popularity of what you write. Is that something that the Huffington Post would consider, or is that just completely, absolutely no?
We know what we do well, and we know how we've built that success, and it is very much for us, blogs are a platform. This isn't about professional journalists, although we do have professional journalists who do contribute blogs. I think those that I've spoken to personally have said to me it's really great to be somewhere where they can kind of indulge their passions. They're not going to get edited in a way they would elsewhere. They don't have to hit a deadline. It's up to them to write when they want to. But the fact that you have got people from all walks of life. So, no, this works really, really well for us. It's what we're known for on the blogging side. And, you know, we complement it with the in-house editorial team.
So I don't know if you're able to do this, but if of those three kind of content legs
Yeah.
of the stool, the original content, the curated content and the blogging content, what kind of proportion of your traffic comes from each, and what's the most powerful driver of what you do?
It really does vary day in, day out, and that will depend on what's going on in the news that day, who we've got blogging for us as well. You know, sometimes a really big name will send huge amounts of traffic. Sometimes it's just someone who writes a great blog that might go viral. I'd say on an average day, it is the news articles that we're generating in-house, but that could totally change tomorrow just because someone writes a great blog, or we see a great headline elsewhere that we're linking out to.
So in the UK, you've been going not that many months.
We launched on July the 6th.
There's been some kind of vagueness about how well it's doing, and I know there's a lot of people who would like to shoot you down and would like to rain on your parade and all that kind of stuff. But nobody's listening, so you can kind of tell us here.
Yeah.
What's the trajectory been like, and what's happened with kind of traffic growth, and where do you think you're going to be in a few months' time?
We have seen significant increases in traffic every month, 20% increases month on month. So I'm really happy with the rate that we're growing at. We've launched new sections, so we launched tech and education in August. We launched culture and celebrity in December. We will be launching sport next month. So we're adding to the team, we're adding sections to the site. The sky's the limit, potentially.
You very carefully didn't give me a number there, I noticed.
Oh, okay.
Can you give any numbers?
I'm more than happy to give you numbers. I'm just trying to think. I want to get January absolutely right. But I think global traffic to the site in January was, I think, 5.3 million.
And for the UK site?
For the UK site,
yeah. And one of the challenges, I read somewhere that one of your critics was saying, well, yeah, there's an awful lot of traffic, but the harsh reality of it is that a huge proportion of that traffic is from overseas, and the truth of that is that monetizing that with UK media buyers is almost impossible, or if it is doable, it's at a very, very low price.
So we're in a really lucky situation that I belong to a global company, so we can monetize that traffic because the US can monetize that traffic just as the way we can monetize UK users that we send to the US site. So it's great. People can come from wherever to read our site, just as we will send people through to the US site, say to read US politics, does really, really well. Lots of the tech content in the US, we send traffic through. And what we do day in, day out is make sure we don't compete. So we try and complement the two sites. So it's the Oscars taking place Sunday night. I've got my UK journalists concentrating on stories that will be relevant to our UK audience. But we know they're probably just as interested in some of the big American winners, and that's where we kind of work really closely with those teams to complement our coverage. We've got a French site as well now, so next time Sarkozy decides he wants to snub Cameron, we've got a French team that we can call on and say, what's the actual, what are people in France saying about that? And I think that's something that, as we get bigger and bigger, we want to make sure that all those international teams are sort of helping each other out.
Most traditional media companies, whether they're national newspapers or consumer mags or even kind of trade media, spend a lot of time now talking about not just how big a pile of traffic they've got, but what the level of engagement is they have with users. Yep. Given your slightly unusual model of this three-legged stool that we talked about, what kind of levels of engagement do you get? So, how many page views per session visit do you get typically, and how do you think that compares with a traditional newspaper site?
The last graph that I had from my stats team, our engagement was higher than a number of our competitors, a number of sort of British newspaper-based websites. But again, it varies from section to section. Something like culture has one of our highest levels of engagement, interestingly. News time spent on that section is considerably longer, but they don't look as many pages because they're reading, they're taking their time over a longer form article. Whereas when you get into an area where you might have more galleries, they're clicking through, but they might not be spending so much time. So it kind of evens out across the site. Comments are up. I think we had a record day about a month ago, which was about 8,000 comments in a day, which is great. Again, the US will have tens of thousands of comments on a single story. So that's my aim, to get there.
What do you do to cultivate that? I mean, because probably the Huffington Post has been arguably the most successful at generating that kind of UGC involvement from users. Certainly in the US, and I've seen some evidence of it in the UK. Yeah. I mean, what do you do to make that happen? I mean, everybody here has got websites, and they look at the comments at the end of stories and go, crikey, how the heck do I get people to engage in that way?
I think, first of all, you've got to make it really easy for them. So let them sign in with Twitter, Facebook, Gmail, whatever you can to make sure there's no barrier. People don't like having to fill in long forms before they can leave a comment. So make it as easy as possible for them. Realise that people aren't going to comment on every single story. It's got to be something that polarises opinion. Do people feel passionately about this? Do they vehemently disagree with it? Or do they really agree with it and strongly agree with it? So as you said, you might see one article which has got hundreds and hundreds, and then another which doesn't have very many at all. And I think the fact we've got the blogs really cultivates that, because a blogger is a first-person piece. It's something that they have felt strongly enough about to write in about. So I think that really helps. And then people get in the habit of it, and then it's all in front of them. They've already logged in once. We're going to make it doubly easy the next time they come back to the site.
Just going back to the curation thing a moment. I mean, I think I quite warm to the idea that putting content together which you think your readers are going to find attractive, regardless of its source, sounds like a very reader-centric thing to do, which sounds kind of fine. But when people go off to one of those links, do they terminate there? Is that typically an exit from the site, or do they, rather like people use Google, bounce in and out?
Bounce in and bounce out. We're finding it's different kind of users, really, and there are some people who are using us as the centre of their online experience. So they are coming in and coming out. Other people you might lose on that session, but then obviously the hope is they'll come back a week later, a day later. What we found is that our newsletter sign-ups have increased substantially recently, and I think that's obviously another way of getting people back to the site on a regular basis and using those carefully. So you're not bombarding them with newsletters, but you're using them when you've got something really interesting to say. What we do find with some stories is they will go and read the story elsewhere, but then come back to our site to comment, because there's this community there that they know, and that they want to have that conversation about something on our site. So we're just beginning to see that here at the moment.
If you're the Daily Mail, we kind of know who you are, and it's pretty clear what your editorial position is. If you're the Daily Telegraph, we kind of know who you are. We're pretty sure what your editorial position is. Given that you've got so much third-party content, much of which you can select, but you're not completely controlling, what's the editorial stance? Because I look at the Huffington Post, and sometimes it feels a bit Daily Mail, and sometimes it feels a bit Sun, and sometimes it feels a bit Telegraph. Okay. And I can never quite sure if I understand what is it. So who's it for?
We don't like being pigeonholed. For me, every day there should be a really great highbrow, lowbrow mix, and that's indulging what people want to read. So we've got the really serious politics in there. We've got great analysis. We're live blogging, PMQs. But we know that our readers were really interested in how much leg Angelina was flashing at the Oscars on Sunday. That was the other big story out of that. So
is that highbrow or lowbrow? just for me.
Lowbrow. But I think in this room we all know that we don't just look at broadsheets, or we don't just look at tabloids, and therefore my aim every single day is to make sure that you're informed, but you're also entertained by what you read on the site. And I'm totally unashamed to say that we've got celebrity content on there, but every day we want to have hard-hitting journalism as well.
I'm going to move on to a slightly kind of different topic, but if you want to ask something, I wasn't going to do Q&As, but just wave at me or tweet at me at whatever the hashtag is, #PE 2012 is going to, and I'll kind of pick it up here. But if you want to, even if you just want to say something, Carla's pretty thick-skinned. I think she'll take it. It'll kind of be fine. Just the other week, not that very long ago, you had the interesting experience of appearing at the Leveson inquiry.
I did.
Which is a fun day out, I would imagine. And you said a couple of things which I thought were rather interesting. You were talking, as they have all been talking about, the nature of ethics in media. And you said we should not be held responsible for blog content in the same way as we're responsible for our own content, which sounded quite odd. Okay. Because if I'm a normal publisher and I recruit freelance contributors or whatever who are not on my payroll, as the publisher of a website or whatever, I am responsible for what they write. It's me who's going to get sued if I commit some terrible libel, and it's me who's going to get in trouble with my readers if I offend or upset them. So, ergo, my logic would be, surely you must stand in exactly the same position in defending or having the regulatory environment, whatever it might be, for blogs, if you're the publisher of them, as you would for your own content, shouldn't you?
So what I think we need to be, or what we believe we have to be quite careful is differentiating between those. If we get to a stage where we edit blogs in the same way we edited our in-house writers, you're not going to get that freedom of expression that's really important to the blogs. I don't expect our bloggers, most of them are not trained journalists, they haven't spent years in media law. We provide them with a framework, so there's a kind of terms and conditions, kind of blogger guidelines actually is probably a better way of phrasing it. And in it we state quite clearly, this isn't a place for inflammatory material, you need to be aware that what you're saying has your name on it. So we provide them a framework. It does get seen by our blog team, and they will glance over, more than glance over it, they're reading through everything that goes on the site.
Every blog post that appears on the HuffPo is read by one of your team?
Yes, and if we see something on there that sort of waves a red flag, then the blogs team will come to me and we'll make that decision to publish or not. If we're really concerned about it, we'll go to our legal team. However, if we get into the nitty-gritty of editing those in the same way, you wouldn't get that freedom of expression, and you wouldn't get the sort of what makes them so great, which is this is someone's personal opinion. So that's what we differentiate.
But if you're making an editorial decision about whether you allow it to appear on the site, and you are actually reviewing material pre-publication, it's still not clear to me why you wouldn't be prepared to stand by the same ethical rules and paradigms that you would for your own content. Because you always have the choice to say, I won't publish. This is clearly a story which has been procured in nefarious ways or whatever it might be, and therefore I'm not prepared to publish it.
If we were to get to that stage, then we wouldn't be able to operate our blogs platform in the way that we do at the moment, because it would need a huge team of people to be able to go through each of those, check every word, go back and source those. So we put the onus on the blogger. Again, this is the platform. You take responsibility for what you're writing there. To a certain extent, in the same way that people make a comment on a story, if you say something libelous in a comment, we reserve the right to remove that, but we don't pre-moderate those. So if we see something or a red flag gets raised, yes, we will pull that down. But if you said something that was, or if you were doing something that was in any way illegal, then we need to work with sort of police enforcement in whichever country that would be to let them know about that. So this is your area of the site, and we'll give you a framework within to work, and then editorially, that's what we're concentrating on for journalists.
So if anybody here was tempted to, maybe some people do, allow open blogging on their site, what is the kind of the legal position? If a blogger commits a libel, is that down to you?
In our terms and conditions, that if the blogger has taken responsibility for that and they've signed up to our terms and conditions, no, that's the responsibility of the blogger.
Is that tested in law? I'm not sure that's...
Well, I mean, this is one of the things that's open for question at the moment. I think this is one of the things that will be interesting that comes out of Leveson. But there's also a defamation bill going through at the moment, which our legal team are working very closely with the lawmakers around that, because we actually want to say, let's try and be more open about this. In the US, for instance, they can pre-moderate all their comments, but most newspaper sites in the UK can't do that, because if you do, you suddenly take responsibility for everything, which means it's you kind of have less control over that. We'd love to have more, and The Guardian has made the decision. It's one of the few sites in the UK to pre-moderate all their comments, which I think is admirable. But 99%.
It gets them into trouble sometimes, and people get very cross about it.
Yeah. And you need to make sure you've got an awful lot of money in case it ever goes to court.
So is it clear to you what moderation means? Because I'm struck with what you said earlier, where you said, well, we review every blog post in order to determine whether it's acceptable or whatever. Does that not count as moderation?
Process, it's a type of moderation. But that's kind of a helping hand we're giving you. We're checking that you have also complied by the framework that we've given you to blog. And if we think you haven't, we'll go back to the blogger and say, we think you probably need to make some changes to this. Have you read the guidelines? Do you think your blog falls within that? And give them sort of 24 hours to come back.
So until this kind of, there's some case law about this, we're kind of all kind of noodling away without really being quite sure what our legal obligations are. But
we have a very firm position, and we know what that position is, which is the responsibility for that blog post is with the blogger. But we have a team here that are going to help you and make sure your blog is as good as it can be, just in the same way we help them promote it. So we suggest that you might want to tweet this link, or you might want to post this to Facebook. Suggest maybe the word count, because we know that works well for our users. But at the end of the day, this is your blog.
If just hang on to this kind of ethics issue, because you write a lot about the same kind of stuff that appears in, you do quite a lot of celebrity coverage, for example, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
If that's being written by staffers,
yes,
it is reasonable to expect that you, as the manager, would have some control and influence over the way in which those stories were procured. And certainly, if you were being asked to make payments to police officers, just picking something at random, or hack into people's phones, for example, then you can make a call about whether or not you're prepared to do that, and whether that is or is not within the ethical guidelines.
Yeah.
If Greg Mulcair had been one of your bloggers, you would never have known, would you?
Oh God, that is a good question. No, I suppose I probably wouldn't have known.
Does that worry you?
Not at the moment, because we haven't had a situation that got even near that. And I think also, if you read through our blogs, as a general rule, our blogs are someone's opinion. People don't use our site to expose things or people. So I think if a blog came through and part of it was, we've heard this about X, and my blog team saw that and thought, oh, how on earth would that person have got that information, that we would instantly have pushed it back and asked questions.
You took an interesting position, I thought, at the Leveson inquiry, where most of the newspaper industry is kind of pushing back against more kind of regulation and concerned kind of about the freedom of the press. And rather interestingly, voluntarily, the HuffPost signed up to be a member of the PCC, which is interesting in itself. Yeah. And therefore, presumably, you were quite happy, in principle, to be regulated in the same way as the dead tree industry is regulated, however that turns out as a result of the Leveson recommendations. So, and you're almost alone in web publishing in taking that view. So I'd be interested in why you want to be managed and controlled in that way.
I think it's really important that we're not just a blog site, we are a news-based website, that we get to have a say in how we're regulated going forwards. And being a part of the PCC means we are already seeing what Lord Hunt is pulling together. My legal team are actually getting a chance to review that. If we weren't part of the PCC, that never would have happened. I think as a framework, it's really sensible, the PCC code of conduct. It's something that I had expected all my journalists to have read anyway. And I think if you're going to do that and suggest to your team, you should be mindful of the PCC code, then we kind of need to put our money where our mouth is and be part of that conversation. And I think that for the media industry as a whole, it's really important that they are consulting new media, if you can still call websites new media. And we want to be part of that conversation, and being a member of the PCC was tied up with that.
How, though, are we going to distinguish between the Huffington Post, which is clearly a thing, it's an entity, it has a brand and whatever, and the standalone amateur blogger? I mean, how? So it seems ridiculous that a professional news organisation should be regulated, but in inverted commas, an unprofessional one should not.
I totally agree with you on that, and I think we need to be very aware of that, because I think the problem we've got with the media industry in this country is we're making it very difficult for new brands to enter the market. And I think that someone starting up with their own blog shouldn't be tied up with red tape. They shouldn't be tied up with legal mumbo jumbo. But there's going to get to a stage where it's important for their reputation to be part of a body and to sign up to a code. So I think it is interesting they're talking about kind of layers. So initially, if you want to be treated in such a way and you want your audience to respect you and trust you, then you might have some kind of kite mark that says, accuracy is going to be really, really important to us. And that as you have further training, that you would then be sort of given the right tick boxes in that way. So my analogy on this is, and kind of bear with me in here, and this is coming from someone who used to work on women's magazines, the Soil Association, their logo, pretty much known everywhere. It's almost a household name for something which has the word association in it. And most women, if they're buying organic beauty products, know to look for that. However, for lots of organic beauty brands entering the market, the guidelines are so stringent and it's pretty expensive, they can't get that. But that's something they aspire to and they work to it. And you'll suddenly see, I get a million press releases a day and still get lots about makeup and skincare. We've finally got our accreditation, and I think that it's seen as so prestigious and people want that trusted authority that they will do what they need to get that. And I almost think that's the way we need to start thinking.
That might mitigate against kind of entrepreneurial journalism a bit, mightn't it? So it might kind of actually reinforce the position of the existing brands who can afford to,
potentially it
sign
could, but I think
process.
it gives everyone something to aspire to, but it doesn't mean that you can't publish a site if you're not signed up to this. And I also think at the end of the day with all of this, there are laws in place, and the reason that we are where we are with Leveson and everything else is some journalists broke the law. And there's no getting away from that. None of us are saying that those laws shouldn't be in place. We just need to make sure these things are caught really early.
Well, that's the irony. That's why I'm slightly surprised that some people, including you, Carla, are almost canvassing for more regulation. Given that if every journalist who has been humiliated or whatever at the Leveson inquiry had obeyed the law, there would be no issue. There already is plenty of regulation which prevents all this stuff happening.
I don't want more regulation. I want journalists to be protected as well. And I think that's why we want to be part of this conversation. We don't want to get to a stage where politicians are making decisions about what can and can't be published. That's a really dangerous area. I think it's really important. It's very clear how that regulation is going to work. And one of the reasons that the PCC has failed or is deemed to fail is that Guardian journalists went to them and said, you've got a problem here. And they said, no, we haven't. We've asked these people at Paper X, and they said there is no problem. Journalists are pretty good at rooting out bad things, as this whole episode has proven to us. So maybe it's just get more journalists regulating other journalists.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. You said, I think you might have been at the Leveson inquiry, but you certainly said it somewhere that digital websites are the future of the media industry.
Yeah, I got laughed at when I got back into the office. Like, Carla, digital websites? Websites are digital.
Leaving the tautology to one side for a moment, but that's a kind of an interesting position, because put another way, that kind of says, do you know what? The print industry is dead. So if you were still working for a print media company, and you have many years' experience of having done so, and you were sitting now at Condé Nast or IPC or wherever, don't pick those particularly, but you know the kind of thing I mean, what in God's name would you do now? Apart from leave, which you did.
I would make sure that you are investing heavily in your websites and that digital really is first. I think there's a lot of people talking the talk at the moment but not walking the walk, which is, websites are at the heart of our business, but then putting 2 people on their website and 20 people on their print title. I think that you've got to, even if at the moment the majority of your revenue is coming in on print, you've got to make sure that you are using that revenue in the right area. We all know that newspapers, or the number of newspapers that exist now, are not going to be here in the future because it's just too expensive, and those companies are losing money hand over foot. So you've got to put digital first. That doesn't mean you need to close every print title you've got, but make the two work together. And the ones that are being successful have got true multimedia journalists who can file for print, who can file for digital, who can write a snappy, shorter version for mobile. I'm interviewing people at the moment who are coming straight out of university, and for them, there is no one or the other. They don't think that way. They know that they read stuff on their iPad, they read stuff on their smartphone, they might pick up a paper at the weekend, but we've all got to start thinking that way, and it can't be people who've been running things for years and years and years doing the same old methods that they have done up till now, because I just don't believe they'll be here in the future.
So here's a scary thought. So if you got hired as CEO of a traditional media company,
that is a scary thought.
I didn't mean it in that way, but if you were working there, you should be pretty scared, because it sounds to me like you're saying, look, I would have to, one of the things that needs to happen is you need to change all of that senior editorial management, because these are the people who've messed it up for the last 10 years. I'm putting words in your mouth.
I read a really great article by someone who said, he was a kind of old fossil when it came to it, but he finally got on board and realised, the horse is bolted, so he's going to go along for the ride, and he's going to listen to people and get on board with it, and he's now seeing that work through his company. So I think you can teach an old dog new tricks. I don't think it's a question of, axe the entire management and look at it in different ways, but I think you've got to be open to that, and you've got to understand the digital side of your business. And, looking at Leveson, all these old editors who've been around for years are trotting up and being asked, so how does it work on your website? And most of them are going, I don't really know.
I've got one kind of final thought, but does anybody want to ask anything from the audience? Yes. So can we have is there another mic around? Yes, somebody's come on, wave a stick in front of you.
You say you read all the blog posts. Do you do that before they're published?
Yes, we do. Yep.
Before they're published?
Yeah.
And you say that you put the legal responsibility on the blogger according to your guidelines.
Yep.
But Neil asked, has that been tested by case law? I mean, are you confident that the legal system will go along with your...
We had to be very, very careful when we launched in the UK, because it is different in the US. So we couldn't just blindly follow what they'd done in the US. We know the model works. We know the Huffington Post has been phenomenally successful there. But we had a UK legal team working with the US legal team, and we made sure that our blogger guidelines reflected the law in this country. We had external counsel looking over those. So we were really careful with the way that was framed, and making sure that we were giving our bloggers that help before they were publishing to the site. And we have had a couple of cases where legal teams, external legal, have come to us and said, we're really unhappy with this blog for that reason. And in a couple of cases, we have removed the blog because of that. And we've worked with the blogger and explained why we've had to do that, and it's been fine. So.
What about tarnishing your editorial brand by poor quality writing or poor...
It's a really interesting question, because I don't expect them to be Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists who are blogging for the site. We will, again, we will do a light edit in terms of spelling and grammar, but we do realise these are our blogs. They sit in a certain area of the site. It's clear it's not from one of our in-house staff. So I think that people who come to use the Huffington Post on a regular basis realise the difference between the two. That doesn't mean I agree with everything that gets blogged. In fact, I disagree with a lot of it that goes up. But we like to think that there's probably other people who disagree with it as well, and then they'll come on and blog as well. We had Vladimir Putin blogging for us last week, and I can tell you I didn't particularly agree with what he had to say, but someone else did someone else did a brilliant blog about why Putin shouldn't be back in power, and so we had kind of both sides of the story. Someone did an open letter to Richard Branson on the sort of the drugs topic, which he's very passionate about at the moment, and was pretty scathing about him. Next day, he wrote a blog response. And it was, that kind of thing, when you see that beginning to take place in front of you, that's really, really, that's fun, that's interesting. It's kind of working then.
That's interesting that you're a trusted place to kind of do that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that kind of commentary going on the Daily Mail somehow. Vladimir Putin
not.
writing for the Daily Mail just seems weird to me. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just quite interested in the male-female split, as in your readerships and the bloggers as well.
This is a really interesting question. So just before we launched the site, we looked at who was reading the Huffington Post already, so the US version, but from the UK, and it was overwhelmingly male at the time. I don't really know why, but it was. And each month I'm seeing that split sort of get less and less. So I think we're 52% male now and 48% female, which is great. But again, to begin with, it was all male bloggers. It's like, what's going wrong here? We've got a female editor-in-chief here. We've got an international female editor-in-chief. And I sort of sat down with my blogs editor, who's also female, Like, what's going wrong? And we think it was just, there needs to be a little bit of time, and maybe women just take a little bit longer before they're confident to put their views out there. And so we made a conscious effort to make sure we were featuring as many female bloggers on the front page of the site. And the more female bloggers we featured, the more female bloggers we had coming to us. And again, the split's pretty much even between the two now. But I think, you know, you do have to have a bit of a thick skin. I mean, I blog every week and people are pretty rude about what I write. And after a while, you just have to go, you know, take it on the chin and, okay, I'm putting my views out there and expect people to come back and disagree with those.
Got time for one more. Yes, at the back, sir.
How important is Facebook and Twitter for the site, and do you see any differences between the two?
So social media is incredibly important for us. Again, when we were looking at who was on the site, and it was kind of men in their 20s who lived in cities, we knew that the way that we were going to speak to them was socially. It wasn't going to be, you know, big billboards around Leicester Square. It was making sure that we were in their Twitter feeds, in their Facebook feeds. So it's hugely important. Every time we launch a new vertical, a new section on the site, we've got Facebook, Twitter profiles. We've also got Pinterest accounts. We've got Gmail accounts. Sport doesn't launch till next month, but we're already tweeting, we're already posting to Facebook from our HuffPost UK Sport. So it's very important. Facebook still drives more traffic to the site than Twitter, even if we update Twitter 1 million more times a day. My journalists much prefer using Twitter, but we acknowledge the fact that it's so far mainly the media using Twitter in that kind of voracious way. So we know that Facebook will drive more traffic for us. Google Plus is not driving much traffic for us at the moment, but you know, something like Pinterest, I've only just discovered and I'm obsessed by it.
Oh, really?
Yes, but
I almost lost the will to live when I looked at it. I thought, please God, don't give me something else to do.
I think this is a male-female thing again, because my executive editor's male, and I'm like, come on, how are you getting on? I just don't get it, Carla. I don't get it. It's like homework this weekend. Go and set up a Pinterest account. But maybe it is a male-female thing. I love it.
Were you an early Twitter adopter as well?
No, I wasn't.
Because I didn't get that at first.
No,
so now,
when I
alone.
arrived at AOL, I did have a Twitter account, but I don't think I'd ever used it. And my manager at the time said if I wanted to pass my probation period, I had better get on Twitter. And again, now I love Twitter. I can't imagine a day when I don't look at Twitter. So I'm a kind of a medium adopter, or I'm an adopter when I get pushed.
Excellent. You can follow Carla on Twitter. She is at Carla Buzasi.
Yes.
I'm getting closer now.
Buzasi.
ASI. You can also follow me on Twitter as well, at Neil Thackeray, if you want to, or come and kind of have a look at the website. We are out of time. I will take one more question if anybody wants to. As ever, the Huffington Post is fantastically controversial. The Twitter commentary varies between this is a great insight into the future of publishing to if the HuffPo is the future of publishing, God help us. And you know who you are. That's fine. But I'd like to thank you, Carla. You've been open, honest as ever. It's been fascinating. Please give Carla a round of applause and thank you for her time. Thank you very much all for coming.